Here's a hot take for you guys. I love Elden Ring. It's my most played game on Steam, and probably my most played game ever, discounting maybe Minecraft. I've played through it countless times, both by myself and with the amazing seamless co-op mod. It's one of the 2 games I've ever 100%ed, Bloodborne being the other. I've watched countless hours of videos on it, from analyses to challenges, and I've even tried my hand at some myself, including a funny alphabetical run. Do you know how many weapons start with the letter K? I think that this game is so compelling that I've even discussed it in my master's program, and have at least found one person who literally wrote their master's thesis on the game. While I'll always say that Bloodborne is probably my favorite From Software game overall, by any objective, measurable standard, I could be compelled to say that Elden Ring should be one of my favorite games of all time. Thus, it shouldn't come as a surprise that I loved just about everything that came out of its DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree. From the bosses... This is great. To the new weapons... Bro! And the new friends we meet. My gorgeous, sleepy little meow meow. The Shadowed Realm is comically dense, oozing with this harrowing atmosphere that is rivaled in its melancholy only by the main game. In the lands between, Leyndell is easily one of my favorite areas. It's just so incredible how it uses its ambience to tell its story without a word. Leyndell is kind of hyped up from the beginning of the game. Its grandeur is almost always visible from its starting areas, and each step you take closer and closer to its towering walls literally make the world brighter and more golden as you near the Erdtree. And when you finally get there, fighting past the barricades and sentinels, you're greeted with this. The music kicks in with these slow drones and wispy strings that fade in and out, almost as if the track itself was on its dying breaths. The city itself is equal parts gorgeous and lonely. Just walking these ash-covered streets or through these overgrown perfumeries makes me feel so much. I think it's fascinating the innate interest from players and more serious loreheads to brush away the ash and imagine this city at its peak, because other than surface level interest in the world, I don't see how uncovering any of that matters, because that age is gone and dead. Now, soldiers roam the streets, eliminating the crucible-touched misbegotten that have forced their way into the city. Leyndell, and by extension, the Golden Order has fallen. All that remains is this hollow golden facade of a once great order, one that is now shattered. So, when I stepped onto the Gravesite Plain and heard this, I immediately knew that I was going to love this DLC for much of the same reasons. As FromSoft essentially took everything that I loved about the melancholic atmosphere of the base game and amped up the decay and tragedy even further. The entire map is essentially a grave to the world before the Golden Order, a world now massacred, charred, and scorned. Ballarat is a standout for me, the way it illustrates the fate that awaits every political order once they've fallen from their seat of power. I'm almost certain that if we could read the horn-sent inscriptions ourselves, we would find at least one that commands us to look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. The audacious architecture of the tower settlement is the only remaining signifier of the kind of influence the horn-sent once wielded, as the halls beyond this powerful gate are deadly quiet. It feels more like a crypt than anything that was once called a city. The game lets you roam these massive, abandoned halls, at this point only inhabited by cobwebs and these weird spider scorpion things. You would have no clue that this place once sat at the foot of Ener Ilum and the Divine Gate, the two crowning achievements of the Hornsent. It's just so juicy and impressive how much thematic content FromSoft is able to communicate without a word. It's really great stuff. Not to disparage words. I love words, and Shadow of the Erdtree has many, many great ones, enough to single-handedly support entire careers. And although with this video, I want to fill in the analytical gaps that lore-centered discussions have left us with, instead talking about the narrative themes and ideas that Elden Ring wants to convey with its lore, I also can't help but want to do my own little surface-level lore review from the DLC, because there's just lots of cool little things that came from it, a lot of which can be chalked up to how Elden Ring's story was told, with the base game first and a DLC which explores the past second, thus giving the player a fuller context in which to return to the lands between. It's funny to me that despite this being their third time using this gimmick, it still feels insanely fresh, inspired, and plain fun to look back on the main game and see these little tidbits of story that were hidden in plain sight. Probably my favorite example of this comes from the living jars, because as much as I kind of knew what these warrior jar pot people were on a surface level, I didn't really understand them in the base game. Especially the immense reverence that they were given, often found surrounding minor Erdtrees. But now, clearly, it is Marika wanting to give due respect and love towards those individuals who were harmed by the horrific jarring practices of the Hornsent, and potentially even an attempt to rebirth these jar saints through the Erdtree, freeing them from their disfigurement. But this can also get really weird and specific too. Like, for example, I think that the nuance holy damage received in the DLC has a lot of thematic implications to explore. In the base game, holy damage is notably hard to come by, often being restricted to the incantations and weapons of Golden Order fundamentalists, like Radagon and his many, many rings. But in the DLC, holy damage is suddenly much more varied, being turned into spirals by the Hornsent and torturous barbs by the Inquisitors. The actual shape of holy damage is suddenly much more malleable in a way that is now more comparable to magic damage, whose users shape it into hammers and bows and comets. But isn't that interesting that holy and faith is now revealed to be less of a foil and more of a mirror to magic and sorcery? The two types of damage, I'd argue, are most connected to the outer gods and space.
Heresy is not native to the world. It is but a contrivance. All things can be conjoined.
Overall, it makes me think about how holy damage isn't just created from the order inherent to the world, but by belief or ambition, maybe? In some ways, traits that are often embodied by chaos as well. It's worth noting that the sword that can be claimed from Midra's remembrance still uses holy damage, despite its association with a literal lord of frenzied flame. And if I'm really starting to reach, I might even point out how similar its pattern is to other embodiments of holiness that we see in the game. Okay, this will be my last one pretty quick, but I was pretty surprised to see dragon lore expanded on to the extent that it was. Specifically, I really like how it makes Godrick even more of a miserable, soppy little meow meow when he says,
"Mighty dragon, thou'rt a true-born heir. Lend me thy strength, O kindred."
we know he's attempting to appeal to the legacy of Godwyn and his connection with dragons. But unlike Godwyn, who tamed actual true-born ancient dragons, the best Godrick can do is now extra pathetic. Now that we realize the regular dragons he's talking about are this fucked up pug breed of transformed dragon hunters, ones which he ironically calls the truest of dragons, rather than acknowledging them as the malformed offspring of Baal. Likely because he is this shithead who does not know that not every dragon is a true dragon. It's just a little layer that makes him chef's kiss. It really highlights just how much of a shitty half-breed he is. The layers of symbolism and irony are not lost on me. Best demigod easily. But while I definitely enjoy talking about the lore of Elden Ring, and have spent far too much time listening to others talk about it too, I feel like there is only so much that can be said with this kind of surface-level, lore-centered approach of telling the story or solving the mystery. Because Elden Ring, just like any other text, has so much more to say than people give it credit for or care to explore. Ideas that I think get especially interesting in the DLC. And so, I want to spend the rest of this video talking about you, as I think you might be one of the most overhated yet thematically rich characters in the game, and definitely the DLC. No, not you, buddy. Sorry, boss. I'm afraid that I have a deep-seated, inexplicable distaste towards you, one that no amount of sad videos or memes about your horse can fix. But you, which I've gathered is a divisive opinion, most people chalking Miquella up as the evil twink who hurt their favorite Reddit mascot. Which is a shame, because I find Miquella to be an extremely well-written and deeply compelling character. But to set the ground for any conversation about Miquella, I need to talk a bit about his mother, Marika. Marika is a deeply complex character to me, and has quickly become one of my favorite characters in most of fiction, for reasons I hope to elaborate on. I was already thoroughly enchanted by her in the base game. A woman who is equal parts loving and cruel, calculating but emotional and irrational. She's someone who created this utopian process of Erdtree burial, allowing for her servants to have a kind of everlasting life, but simultaneously will command her grand armies on genocidal purges in order to secure the political power of the Golden Order. Not to mention banish and outright murder anyone influenced by the Crucible with an inexplicable fervor. I find it fascinating just how little insight the player gets into her plans or goals, especially in the base game. Elden Ring, more than other FromSoft games, really revels in its obscurity. If you're paying attention in Bloodborne, for example, you can explain to someone what caused the schism between Byrgenwerth and the Healing Church. It's so detailed that we know the specific philosophical differences that caused the split between Master Willem and Lawrence.
We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open. Fear the old blood.
And it's not like they couldn't do this for Elden Ring. In fact, a lot of the quests are very upfront with the player about what is happening. Ranni is a character with motivations and plans that we can understand. She dislikes the oppressive and possibly objectifying relationship that Empyreans have with the Greater Will, and rejects it through assassination and eventually ascension to her 1,000-year voyage under the moon.
I would not be controlled by that thing.
But with Marika specifically, even simple integral questions are kind of a mystery. For example, when exactly did Marika and Radicon become one person? Or, what exactly was Marika trying to do with Godfrey and his armies when she banished them from the Lands Between? And then why return them? Does she really believe in the suffering of the tarnished, as Gideon posits? Or does she genuinely have faith that one day a tarnished will be able to kill a god with a weapon smithed by Hugh, who made her a promise to do exactly that?
Long a god is not easily felled. But one day without fail you will have your wish.
These debates can get as complicated and lengthy as actual theological debates in our own world, which I think is the main inspiration for Elden Ring's interesting take on godhood. Imagine for a moment our own world exactly as it is now, but we knew without the shadow of a doubt that a capital G God was real. All the horrors of the world, the pain, suffering, banishment, death, they still exist, but now we know that there is someone at the helm, at least partially responsible for every event happening in the world. Many people in our own world already wrestle with this, and while I can only speak to my upbringing as a Christian, this classic problem of evil is often rationalized through faith in the plan. Genocide, war, starvation, prejudice. Of course, it's all horrific, but it's part of the plan or test that God puts us through.
La saggezza del piangere, il dono del piangere. Il pianto è umano e cristiano e chiede la grazia delle lacrime.
The follow-up question of why is answered similarly. God's plan is so much bigger than us all, we could never understand why. Thus, there's no reason to even speculate.
Here's a good solution, a good conclusion. God is smarter than me. I will trust his word that he will bring good from this, and I will rest in his goodness in the middle of the situations I'm experiencing that are not good.
All we can do is have faith that God is a rational creature who is letting us suffer, but doing so for a good reason, even if we can't understand it right now, or ever. In part, I think that Marika's enigmatic nature was inspired by this sort of tension between the horrors of the real world and the existence of a god. Both in Elden Ring and real life, we never get to understand exactly why bad things happen. We are only privy to how God's plan affects our lives. A fact that means all we can do is speculate on the divine reasons behind our suffering. And boy howdy do people speculate on Marika's plan, often making the assumption that she has one in the first place. Whether it be because Marika wanted to die herself, or needed her children to die proper deaths in order to ascend to godhood, or because she realized that the lessons caused from struggle and hardship were valuable in their own right, and that removing death from the Elden Ring was a mistake. And I'm glad that Elden Ring has so many #gamers engaging in real critical analysis. Ones that get them to think about the nature of the world, of divinity and leadership. But looking at all of these together, I've always been interested in how much faith there is in the plan. That Marika has to be involved and has to have a reason for all the suffering caused in the Lands Between and the Shattering. A faith that has led some individuals to make claims that are eerily similar to ones I've heard from actual Christians. It was very funny watching Avadi's video in my research and hearing his initial theory about Marika causing the shattering because she believed there was great meaning to be found in oddship. As if that wasn't the exact same line I heard in Sunday school when addressing like the Syrian refugee crisis or whatever was going on in 2011. But even on the flip side, there are individuals like Fat Brett who posit Marika as less of a classically good god, but a deeply self-centered and greedy god.
And is willing to do anything, to destroy everything, to kill anyone, even her own children.
To finally be free of a flawed world of her own making. While the rationale is different, the inhuman rationality is still attributed to Marika, a god who will scheme and kill to get what she wants, her own death. In both cases, she has to have a plan. She has to be involved. Look, this item description says it was rumored that the Black Knives were close to Marika. That's basically an open and shut case. But if my opinion wasn't clear enough already, I've never been particularly convinced that Marika is somehow the mastermind to this multi-level plot for insert your reason here. In fact, I can't help but wonder how much this kind of theorizing is done for its own sake. Because if Marika did what she did for a reason, we can theorize about why until the fucking bombs drop. By turning the text into something vague and unknowable, every answer is equally right. A process not too dissimilar from what H-Bomber Guy calls memification when discussing the kind of YouTube theory culture that exists around games like Five Nights at Freddy's or Undertale. And I apologize if this comes across as more of a direct attack than I mean it to. Like I said, I am glad that people are engaging with the game in whatever way they like. Thinking about narrative and themes is good. But I personally don't think that these theories are particularly in line with what the text of Elden Ring has to say about divinity. As, by and large, Elden Ring reminds the player again and again that its gods aren't all-powerful and divinely rational like we have faith in. Rather, they are just as flawed as humans are. The Mending Rune of Perfect Order puts it best, that the imperfection of all ideology can be blamed upon the fickleness of the gods, no better than men. That is the fly in the ointment. A fact that Count Ymir echoes, lamenting the inherent pointlessness and looking too deeply for a divine plan, not because the plan is too divinely rational to even speculate on, but because there is no rationality.
Suffering. Is there no hope for redemption? The answer, sadly, is clear. There never was any hope. They were each of them defective, unhinged from the start.
Divinity is not post-emotion like we like to imagine. It is instead defined by emotion in the same way that all humans are. Marika the Eternal is definitionally a god, but Marika is also just a broken shaman girl who had lost countless loved ones to the Hornsense violent practice of jar making, a horrific process that involved the kidnapping, murder, and disfigurement of her family, friends, and loved ones. This hurt, lonely shaman made a wish upon a falling star, one who took advantage of her vulnerability and offered her a deal. Metter, daughter of the Greater Will, promised Marika revenge, power, and immortality. Anything she desired could be attained with divinity. But this godhood comes at a cost, the need to give both your body and mind to the Greater Will, becoming one of its most powerful game pieces. While becoming a queen is better than being a pawn, the fact remains that both are just pieces on a board. But whatever concern she might have had left as she held up a strand of gold for the first time, becoming the most powerful person in the lands between. For Marika, a woman who had been scarred by violence and death for her entire life, it only makes sense that she would become a god neurotically obsessed with death, attempting to honor those who had already been transformed and forever protecting those who she holds dear. Her title, Marika the Eternal, even carries just as obvious a connection to Marika's goals as her son, Miquella the Kind. This goal is also my personal guess as to Marika's wish to the grandmother, to be able to save her loved ones the pain of death, and herself the grief that comes with it. This wish explains her relentless fervor against the Glomite Queen, eventually stealing the Rune of Death from her and removing it from the Elden Ring to start a new age of Erdtree rebirth. A golden age where no one but those corrupted by the foul crucible actually die, the only group of people that Marika thought deserved eternal, perpetual punishment for the sins of their ancestors. And for a bit, she might have forgotten that her divinity was a cage, because she was far from powerless. The control she and her children were able to exert over the lands between was immense. They changed not only the culture, but the physical laws of the world. But nothing lasts forever, and not every Empyrean was satisfied with becoming an object of the greater will. When Godwyn the Golden was murdered, it all came crumbling down. The lies that Metter told Marika about godhood and the endless power it could provide. The lies that Marika told herself, that as long as she could protect her loved ones, being used for the machinations of the greater will was worth it. In that moment, her grief must have been immeasurable, not only for the death of her child, but likely the first real death she'd had to process for hundreds of years. But also the grief for her own life, in realizing that all of it meant nothing. Her genocide and revenge, the pain she put herself and her children through constantly just to avoid death. What was that for? What did it do? While some say that this was all part of her greater divine plan to usurp the greater will, one that required the shattering and apparently the murder of her son, I've always thought that she destroyed the Elden Ring and the world out of a very human moment of grief for her child, for herself, for the pointlessness of it all. She might have been a god, but this moment reminded her of how little that actually meant. The symbolism of Marika destroying the Elden Ring, the primary way that she exerted her godhood over the lands between, becomes pretty clear when read this way. It's her rejecting her own divinity, accepting that it's identical to humanity. And nothing really changes for her afterwards, because things were never really that different. She is hung up by the greater will and stabbed through the womb as punishment, forced to continue playing the role of God in the Elden Lord endings. But how markedly different is that from her life before, as the deific mother, as the wife to a lord, as the puppet of the greater will? With all this, I think that Elden Ring's primary theme comes into vision. The inherent humanity, not only in the gods, but any political figurehead. Unfortunately, the people who run our world are people. They are irrational, self-oriented, contradictory, and ruled by emotion.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years.
The game asks, if there were a god, why are we so sure that they would be any different? Even though we don't see much of them, I'd argue that this applies to the greater will as well. They clearly aren't all powerful, or else we'd never be able to reject them like we do in the Age of Stars or the Frenzied Flame endings. The two fingers, their priests and translator, are flawed and nonsensical by the time we start the game, looking more like corpses than anything so directly connected to God. Despite calling themselves outer gods, they show a shocking amount of human characteristics, seeming only to care about their power and legacy. Nothing as rational as we might hope from God. And boy, if this isn't very pointed commentary about the ways that individuals rationalize their suffering with the misguided hope that it's for something. Pain that is required of the divine plan. But it's also worth mentioning that this faith in rationality applies to secular spheres as well. Just look at the ways in which people will intellectualize Hitler as this tactical, charismatic genius, instead of the rambling madman who killed himself before anyone else could. Because to think about his actions as being truly meaningless, bigoted violence for its own sake is admittedly harder to stomach than if it was at least for some reason. A similar post hoc justification that we see for Israel's attack on Palestine. its most ardent defenders seeing the destroyed hospitals, schools, and shelters as a rational, purposeful violence. Definitely not the wanton genocide we'll see it as in 10 years, God willing. Whether it be gods, kings, or presidents, Elden Ring posits that no one is infallible. We're all human, for better and for worse, which is a realization that is as horrifying as it is liberating, because it leaves the meaning of all the suffering in the world for us to figure out for ourselves, rather than placidly accepting that things just are the way they are for rational reasons beyond our comprehension. And to me, this line of thinking is inspiring because it gives us, you and me, viewer, just as much agency to affect the world as even its most powerful people. A theme I think is at the dead center of Elden Ring, a story where even a tarnished of no renown can change the world. Which itself is a beautiful and complicated set of ideas that Elden Ring's narrative attempts to cover. But if you remember, this was a tangent to talk about Miquella, who I think wraps a neat little bow on my idea of divinity, on top of being an interesting and nuanced yet overall disliked character. Miquella, on a surface level, reminds me a lot of Marika, equal parts loving but calculating. He's willing to use his family and friends to accomplish his greater machinations, chewing up Mohg, Radahn, Malenia, Saint Trina, and his cultists for his ascension. But doing this not out of revenge or personal ambition, but a genuine desire to turn this broken, cruel world into one that is loving and kind, like we see from his Haligtree. As much as he is willing to sacrifice others, he is more than willing to sacrifice himself, feeding the Haligtree with his own blood alone, shedding his skin and body in the Shadowed Lands. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little worried about how they would handle Miquella, especially given the noise that From Software's dumbest fans were making, constantly comparing him to Griffith, using that as shorthand for light-haired twink who is evil but also beautiful and kind, instead of any actual meaningful comparison or analysis. Which I think is funny, because now I think that the comparison between Griffith and Miquella really highlights how considerate FromSoft was when avoiding the pitfalls around this character archetype. Prepare for Golden Age spoilers of Berserk for like 2 minutes. Griffith is fascinating as a character because, unlike the generic trope of his ends justifying the means, in large part, the horrible things that he did had nothing to do with the ends, but his ego. The rape of Casca and the traumatizing of Guts only being done so that he could feel powerful again. Griffith's moment of weakness reveals his truest motivations behind all his actions, doing his work not out of kindness and respect for the dead, like what he spews to Lady Charlotte, but as a broken, greedy man who wants to be powerful, a taint that will forever affect everything good we see him do later. He's not good guy does evil thing, rather he's narcissist whose ego project happens to be generally good. Okay, I'm done with Berserk now. Miquella, in large parts, subverts the subversion by being truly unconditionally loving in his drive for power. I would have been irritated if FromSoft had just said, "Oh wow, OMG, how crazy, this nice person turned out to be mean, they're Miquella the Cruel." And while some people still think that this is the case, I find Miquella as compelling as I do because, by and large, they aren't particularly evil or cruel at all. Marika is. She continually subjects anyone touched by the Crucible to death as revenge for what the Hornsent did to her. But most of what Miquella does is nowhere near as tyrannous as I've seen people make it out to be. As to me, his decisions are generally pragmatic, heartless in the cases of his manipulations, sure, but he's making the mother of all omelets by changing this cruel world of his mother into something kinder. If anything, He's the closest thing in the game to a truly compassionate god, one who sees the suffering of the world and will do anything, kill anyone, to stop it. It's also really interesting to me that these same claims of villainy aren't levied against the other self-centered pragmatist we see in the game, Ranni. Both are demigods who orchestrated quite violent plans that involve attacking their own family, and both had close friends they used and threw away once they served their purpose. Both of them had to undergo a process of shedding their bodies in order to ascend. Both of these new bodies having 4 arms. They literally both say that they will guide a 1,000-year voyage. But because you can get married to one and have to fight the other, I generally see a lot more sentiment oversimplifying Miquella as the evil one, without really substantiating that claim. I think a lot of people start with the assumption that FromSoft believes Miquella is evil, evidenced by the fact that you must stop them in the DLC. There is no choice in the matter. But I don't find this assumption to be particularly convincing, because the game is more than happy to let you choose terrible ends for the lands between, most notably the Frenzied Flame and Dung Eater ending. But even these most atrocious endings have their ardent defenders who will argue for their moral superiority. And honestly, who am I to declare that any one ending is the best one? This is a From Software game. Since when have any of their games had truly good endings, maybe with the exception of Sekiro? Despite this, it's pretty widely agreed upon that Ranni's Age of Stars is objectively the best ending. It's the most popular on Steam, and all the YouTube people seem to like it, so it must be good. But I do wonder how many people could tell me exactly what her ending entails. How many people have gotten all of Ranni's secret dialogue, and have learned that her plan isn't too different from the Human Instrumentality Project? One which will create a world where bodies are meaningless, and we exist as an amorphous blob of emotions and souls floating through space. And of these people, I wonder how many of them truly think that this is the best ending for humanity. Furthermore, many of the arguments I've seen claim her ending is the best because it is absent from the influences of the outer gods at all. But this doesn't seem to be true. Ranni explicitly states that we will be removed from gold and the greater will, instead being ruled by the Dark Moon, a different outer god. Look, it's right there. We can see it. And again, to the lovers of this ending, I'd ask if the influence of a moon god is truly the best thing for humanity. If From Software's other games are anything to go by, I have my doubts that any moon presence out there has our best interests at heart. And even if you're still sold, I would ask if it was truly worth all the suffering that Ranni caused in the Shattering, the countless dead, the infighting and wars, the death of every member of her family. When placed together, I find it perplexing that she is exempt from the claims of villainy often applied to Marika, Miquella, or the rest of her family. And forgive me for being too woke, but I think this is grounded in layers of misogyny. Ranni is a woman you marry, a romantic aspect that many players admit is the primary reason for supporting her. A fact I find ironic given the track record of Empyreans using their loved ones as tools. But don't worry, I'm sure you'll end up different than E.G. or Blide or Godfrey or Radagon or St. Trina. This is true love. Furthermore, it's telling that despite being a doll, people objectify her endlessly, changing her form to meet our desires. Do you want her to be goth? Do you want her to have bigger tits? These are socially acceptable forms of desire that have existed within the community since the game dropped, and is a kind of wish fulfillment that Miquella just can't fill. While he is still divinely beautiful, it would be gay to desire him in the same way as Ranni. And even if you did, the game doesn't give you the same opportunity to fulfill that desire. Miquella has his lord already. Radahn, a fan favorite, the Reddit mascot himself, is reduced to a gay, subordinate puppet in a way that makes people feel deeply uncomfortable, I think. A discomfort that is levied against Miquella, whose queerness is used as this target of villainization. He is manipulative, gross, incestuous, and, dare I say it, a groomer. He hurt my favorite character, thus I have to call him a fucking twink, totally in a way that is not a slur, guys. While I've seen some people call out FromSoft and Georgie Boy for creating a story that features a slew of problematic queer characters, as I've highlighted, I don't think the intention with Miquella was to make him a uniquely evil villain. When looking at the text, I think he's the least ethically compromised out of Ranni and Marika. But because we live in a heteronormative society, it's hard to write such a nuanced story in a way that people will engage with. It will always be easier to blame the fact and have people nod along with you. So then, what do I actually think the ending has to say? Because I really do think that FromSoft is trying to say something about Miquella and his age of kindness that is more interesting than just, wow, good person does bad thing? And I do think it's telling that FromSoft doesn't let us follow Miquella into his 1,000-year voyage. The closest thing we can do is succumb to his charm, which the game still counts as a game over, respawning us at the nearest grace like any other death. But to say that killing Miquella is good because his plans are bad is a misreading, I think. One that ignores what we were told from St. Trina and what we've learned from Marika. St. Trina says, make Miquella stop. Don't turn that poor thing into a god.
Godhood would be Miquella's prison. A caged divinity is beyond saving.
And we know that St. Trina is right about this because we see in the opening cutscene of Elden Ring what a raw deal godhood was for Marika. For all she sacrificed, for all the violence she inflicted, all she was rewarded with in the end was a dead kid and an endless existence crucified, stabbed through the womb. Even as a god, there is only so much that you can do. The only kindness that Marika could give her people was a consolation, a golden tree that shines in an abandoned village. And I think that we know that Miquella would end up no different, because the more he tries to control things, to shape the world to his will, no matter how noble his intentions, the more he will be anguished by how powerless he is in the end. Marika stole the rune of death to save her children from death, just for it to be stolen back. Godwyn killed. Marika was far less kind than Miquella is, but even she broke eventually under the weight of her own futility. Miquella spent his whole life trying to separate the people he loved from the influences of the outer gods, evident by his research into needles and unalloyed gold. But in his final memory after defeating him, he says, "I'm going to become a god if we honor our part of the vow." Despite all his research, all his sacrifices, he could not find a way to create his kinder world without making a vow with an outer god, quite possibly the Greater Will. And so, he prepares to make his final, most desperate sacrifice to create his order, shedding his bones and skin and heart and doubts, slowly becoming a different person entirely just to accomplish his mission, lying to himself that this would be worth it. But a caged divinity is beyond saving. We know that his order will be just as futile as everything else he had ever done in his life. So, I think to kill Miquella is a deep act of kindness, or as St. Trina puts it, forgiveness. Not the act of heroism that some make it out to be, saving the lands between from whatever evil his godhood would have meant. It's more akin to the ending of the Old Hunters DLC, doing one last kindness by putting the poor, lost, crying child of the god who started it all out of its misery. This reading is why I love Elden Ring so much. It's this beautifully tragic tale of a family who believe too much in this lie of divinity, using these eldritch gods that exist beyond the lands between as crutches to fulfill their human desires, for revenge, for immortality, for independence, for kindness. As I wrote this, I couldn't help but wonder if this association with divinity is the rot that Count Ymir describes, one whose blame lies squarely with the mother. A mother who learned too late how truly meaningless divinity is, and maybe that's why our grace continues to point us towards Miquella, Marika doing one last kindness by helping us stop her son from making the same mistakes that she did. Regardless, the messages of Elden Ring resonate with me on a deep level. To me, the story says that there are no shortcuts to power, and no way to really change the world. All that matters is how you live, how you treat people, and what you do with the agency that you were given. Furthermore, while I only briefly touched on this, I think that Elden Ring is undeniably invested in the idea that things end. I find it fascinating that both Miquella and Ranni declare that their order will only last for 1,000 years, and the rest of the game is strewn with the headstones of other political orders that have come and gone. The Hornsent, the Giants, the Knock, the Ancient Dragons, the Ancestral Followers. I could go on. People die, and that is awful. But births continue.
There is beauty in that, is there not?
Things might be completely terrible right now, but there is a comfort in knowing that this too shall pass. No age is forever. All we can do is do what we can to try and make our next age just a little better. If you've made it through my indulgent and incoherent thematic analysis, I just want to say thank you, really. Believe it or not, I prefer making shorter videos, but if you couldn't tell, I really do adore this game and its narrative, and I hope I've done it a bit of justice with my own personal reading into its themes on divinity, among other things. If you liked my analysis, I'd like if you stuck around. I have at least one more Elden Ring video in me, if you can believe it. I'd also really love to hear your thoughts on the game, or my takes, as I think by far the most enjoyable and important aspect of any media analysis is discussion. Everyone reads the text differently, and hearing those perspectives will only strengthen one's understanding. Okay, I'm done. No more talking now. Thank you again for your attention and your time.